Good afternoon, Your Highnesses, Excellencies and dignitaries, members of the ABLF network and all of our wonderful guests here with us today. My name is Resham Katecha, a strategy and policy specialist based in the UK, and I am, as ever, delighted to be here at the ABLF. I'm really excited for you to hear from our next guest, who is an incredible woman and venture capitalist, Sonia Wehmuller, who is a founding partner of VentureSouk, a GCC-based venture capital fund based on early stage technology with a portfolio of over 200 companies. Sonia is also on the board for the Village Capital Sustainability MENA programme. She's a charter member and board director for TIE's Dubai chapter, and she serves as the UAE director for the Yale Alumni Schools Committee. She has her undergrad from Yale, an MSc from the London School of Economics, and is a Kaufman Fellow. So lots to learn from her today. So Sonia, thank you so much for joining us today. You've often said that you are an accidental investor. How did that happen, and how did you end up where you are today?
Yes, I definitely define myself as an accidental venture capitalist. I studied politics undergrad and grad, thinking I was going to be a journalist, thinking I'd be the next Christian Amanpour, actually, specifically. And then very quickly got sucked into corporate and started my career at Microsoft while I was doing my master's. So I was working with the strategy and M&A team. And that was pretty much the end of my journalistic aspirations. Then I joined Viacom. And joined their strategy team covering emerging markets. So Russia, Central Eastern Europe, Middle East, Africa, India, was with them for almost 5 years, and then joined Turner Broadcasting. So I joke that I got closer to Christian Amanpour because Turner owns CNN, but more on the strategy commercial development side. And while I was at Turner, started VentureSouk with 3 friends. So, you know, back then, the venture capital ecosystem in 2013 was very nascent. There were a lot of young professionals here in the GCC like ourselves in their late 20s, you know, had an interest in investing in early stage tech, just didn't have a regional platform to do so. And so we just created an informal investor club, and then it just grew into its own. We all quit our day jobs to do this full time, and we ended up growing into the largest syndicate in the Gulf region. So that's how we grew our portfolio to over 200 companies from around the world.
Wow, and I love that that came from a place of collaboration and working together rather than competition, which is how I imagine most people think about the VC world. And you've got this amazing focus on impact investment. So how do you view the crossover of that not-for-profit sustainability kind of world with the making money and the return on investment that VCs are normally kind of known for?
I think in general, especially in this region, but it's happening obviously in the West as well, there's this bifurcation of, you know, kind of philanthropic money versus for-profit investments. And we launched our own, what we call Conscious Investment Fund last year. And the idea is that we look at deals commercially exactly the same way that VentureSouk typically looks at deals. We're just hyper-focused on sectors that we feel are still underserved from capital injection standpoint, capital from this region specifically. So how do we unlock MENA capital and support entrepreneurs and ventures that are tech-enabled globally that are looking to solve for our most immediate challenges, whether it be societal or financial inclusion or environmental. And so we ended up launching that last year in March, coincidentally alongside COVID, which was not the plan because this had been in the works for the last 3 years, actually. We just were doing a lot of kind of data mapping, kind of investor focus groups to understand how can we be of most service to the regional dynamic that we sit in order to come up with a proposition that actually makes sense. And so we launched what we called the Conscious Collective last year. And we made 14 investments since then across financial inclusion, so fintech, ag and food tech, environmental tech, and health tech. And, you know, we've invested in Indonesia, we've invested in Kenya, in the US, in the UK, in LATAM, and here in the MENA region. And so really, we're on a mission to kind of educate the market and show that you can invest in tech-enabled ventures that are going to be financially sustainable, scalable, and that you can exit as an investor as well. And I think that's the misconception that there is in this region.
And you spoke about the bifurcation there between the not-for-profit investing and the profit investing. There's also been a noticeable shift in the environment about corporates who used to talk a lot about corporate social responsibility, and many still do, shifting towards investment. So how have you seen that playing out, and how does that magnify the impact?
I think there are a lot of corporates that have, you know, what they call CSR programs. And typically there's a theme around that. So, this year we'll invest in female empowerment, or this year we'll invest in the environment, or this year we'll invest in people with determination. And I do see, as an investor, I do see a shift happening amongst the corporate community. So, for example, back in 2018, we invested in an environmental tech company that's essentially reforesting the planet at an industrial scale using drones. And we went in, it was a seed stage deal, so very early. And who co-invested alongside us? The third largest drone manufacturer in the world, publicly listed company. They didn't say, hey, we have $1 million, let's put it into a CSR program to plant more trees. They said, let's invest in a company that's tech-enabled and that's doing this at scale. And I think once you have these corporates actually kind of having skin in the game through equity, then that's when there's alignment between kind of the investor and the corporate community and the company. Because the company gets the money, but they also get the strategic value that a company such as this one, for example, would add. And so, of course, that corporate is going to roll out the red carpet because they're incentivized to see that company succeed now because they have equity in the company.
And you spoke about educating people and educating the sector. How are you doing that in order to leverage these partnerships or these investment vehicles to create positive change?
So for me, it was very important that we educate this market first here in the GCC where I sit. So it would have been very silly of me to wake up and say, ooh, I sit in a region with very deep pools of capital. Let me launch a $100 million impact fund. Because honestly, it would have fallen on deaf ears. People don't understand the space. They still associate with philanthropy. And so I was kind of on a mission to kind of educate the market first before actually launching a larger fund, which is what we're going to be doing. And so what we ended up doing is we actually launched what we call a Conscious Investor Fellowship, or CIF is the acronym. And it was important to me that this not be another kind of market-specific exercise. So, I am Dubai versus I am Abu Dhabi versus I am Saudi. And it was very important to me that this be a collaborative initiative. And so we roped in NYU Abu Dhabi Start AD, who've been a long-term partner of ours. We roped in Shira in Sharjah. We roped in Hub 71 in Abu Dhabi. We roped in Kaust in Saudi. And together we launched this 8-week investor accelerator program. And it walked the fellows, so they're all fellows, through everything from what is conscious investment what is conscious investing, and how does this fit within my overall strategy as an investor? How should I diligence deals? How should I look at term sheets? How should I value a company? How do I do portfolio management? How do I do impact measurement, etc.? It was very light touch. It was by invite. So we invited 30 senior level executives from the region, and it was virtual, obviously. And yeah, the beauty of it is that we had a diversity of stakeholders. So we had government stakeholders, mainly from the UAE and Saudi. We had corporate stakeholders, the head of HSBC Sustainability, Mina, joined as a fellow, for example. We had individuals that work for the royalty, for the highnesses, who joined the program. We had private investors, high net worth individuals, and 57% of our 30 fellow cohort was actually female, which was fantastic. And over 70% of the cohort were GCC nationals. So clearly, to me, this points to an increased interest in this space. And I think we're going to be seeing more of this. And so this was the first cohort that we did in Q4 last year. We're about to launch our second cohort in September. And it's going to be a similar format. We bring in outside speakers who are veterans from the space, whether it be academia, whether it be venture capitalists, whether it be sector experts, and basically take them on this journey. And for me, the main objective is creating that shift in mindset away from this is philanthropy to this is the future of investing. Because for me, this is the future of investing. And I keep on saying it, whether you like it or not, this is the future of investing, because the next generation are hyper conscious about the brands that they buy into. They're also hyper conscious about the investments that they make.
And so I want to pick up on that because there's been much talk about the global shift in terms of demographics, especially in the GC, but all around the world, a real shift in the workplace with millennials like us, but Gen Z coming through, who are, as you say, much more mission focused. So how do you see the future of investing changing, not just within VentureSuite, where you're obviously very consciously aware, but in terms of VCs globally?
I think there is already a shift happening when you're seeing the likes of the Andreessens that are starting to kind of incorporate impact measurement into their investment memos. For us, that's just natural. We write 40-page memos for each of the investments that we make. Half of the memos for Conscious Collective are around impact measurement. So I think there's going to be more kind of traditional financial players jumping on this bandwagon. I think the very important point to make here is where the intentionality lies. Why are you doing this? So if you're listening and you're an investor, I think it's very important for you to kind of sit with yourself and reflect on why you're doing this in the first place, because in the end, we don't want this to turn into kind of greenwashing exercises amongst, government stakeholders or corporate stakeholders. We will really want players that are going to be there alongside the entrepreneurs to help them on their journeys, because ultimately we're all intertwined in the end with our planet, with our people. And so the more the intention is positive, the better it is for everyone. And so I think there are some key shifts that are happening amongst the venture capital community itself. I think when we launched Conscious Collective, people were a bit clueless about what we were trying to do. Now people get it and they understand. And because we have companies that we can point to, we've invested historically as VentureSouk in over 30 companies that actually fit the Conscious Collective mandate. So we actually have live examples of companies that have gone on to raise their Series Bs and Cs, et cetera, that are doing very well, but are extremely impactful as well. And so again, for the investors listening in, when we talk about kind of a conscious company or a conscious leadership, what you're looking for really is, how is the impact embedded in the DNA of the company? How is the impact embedded in the commercial model of the company, so that as the commercial metrics go up, so does the impact? And that's actually what we look for.
And I assume that for that, you really need mission-driven entrepreneurs. So how do you think we should be nurturing the next generation of mission-driven entrepreneurs?
So I think it's interesting because obviously there's two sides to the equation, right? There's the investor side and then there's the entrepreneur side. As we had LPs, by the way, in the fellowship as well, regional LPs who were fellows. As the LPs start asking their portfolio funds to start reporting on impact, that will inevitably trickle down to the entrepreneur, right? So we need everyone to be equipped with the right tools in order for this to work. And so I do think there's going to be a lot of work, especially in this region, to do around equipping the entrepreneurs. If the fund that has invested into you is asking for you to start reporting on impact metrics, how are you going to go about doing that? And so I think creating more awareness around impact measurement amongst the startup community is very important. There's the commercial KPIs, but there's also the impact KPIs. And I think it's the same, by the way, for the LP community and the investor community. That's why the educational component is so important, because everyone's going to have to report on some of these metrics and everyone needs to understand how to do that. And of course, one big issue that keeps on popping up is that there is no standardized impact measurement tool. So for example, for us, transparently, we use a mix of them. Of course, there's the SDGs that everyone is kind of pulling out of their pockets, left, right, and center. But there's also GIN, Global Impact Investor Network, have their own set of metrics called IRIS Plus, which is what we use as a base. But then we layer on our own impact KPIs on top of that. So we use IRIS Plus as a base and then layer on customized impact KPIs, because the KPIs will depend on the sector that you're investing into as well. So if you're investing in a health tech company, it's going to be very different if you're investing in a fintech company in Southeast Asia. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We're doing it internally right now. I think we're seeing more and more kind of impact advisory companies popping up in the region as well, for a reason. Clearly, there's appetite on the investor side and also on the startup side. I think as an investor and as an LP, if you're listening in, I think helping the companies that you invest into or the funds that you invest into kind of delve deeper into how they're going to choose to develop their own theory of change as an entity, and how they're going to associate specific impact metrics with the legacy that they want to have is going to be key moving forward.
You spoke about the internal work you're doing. I wanted to pick up on that in terms of unconscious bias in investment decisions, because numerous global studies have shown that female founders find it harder to get venture capital funding relative to their male counterparts. How do you at VentureSouk work to tackle unconscious bias in investment decisions? Although I have to say there's clearly work being done if 57% of your fellows were female, so that's great. But how do you tackle that?
Well, I think I'm slightly biased because half of our team at VentureSouk is female. 2 out of the 4 founding partners, myself included, are female and called Sonia, which makes everyone's life easier. So I think it inevitably trickles down. Even when I was building up the Conscious Collective ethos and kind of investment mandate, gender actually never came into play, as in like, we want to make sure that we invest in 50% of female-led kind of ventures, etc. It just happened organically. So if we look at the portfolio that we have right now, 43% of the companies we've invested into as Conscious Collective have at least one female co-founder. So of course, I think there's a lot more work to do, including in this region, but honestly more globally, around having more female venture capitalists come on board, which is why I wanted to talk about the fact that I'm an accidental venture capitalist. I think for the younger audience that's listening in, there is no one size fits all to getting into venture capital. And, you know, if anything, and if I look back in my own professional trajectory, which was essentially in old and new media on the strategy side, that collection of different experiences that I had is what has made me the investor that I am today. So I guess my advice to the entrepreneurs, I mean, the younger generation listening in, or even the entrepreneurs who want to go on the venture capital side, is just gather as much experience as you can and absorb as much as you can. And that's what's going to make you an excellent investor down the line. And just one last thing that I do want to mention is I was once asked years ago, you know, what do you owe your success to, depending on how you define success. But I said empathy. In order to be a good investor, you have to have a very strong sense of altruism and empathy, because you need to be there and help the entrepreneur on their journey. We're here to support the entrepreneur, not to direct the entrepreneur.
I love that. What a kind of refreshing approach to the skill you need to actually support entrepreneurs. And in terms of supporting entrepreneurs, what support from government would you like to see over the next few years? Of course, entrepreneurs have had a particular challenge over the last year trying to take fledgling businesses and keep them afloat during the pandemic. So what support would you like to see from governments or other private sector organizations?
Candidly, I would say fund of funds. So we're seeing those obviously pop up in the region. In an ideal, if you gave me kind of a magic wand, I would say I would love to see each government from each, you know, kind of market within the GCC kind of launch a fund of fund initiatives focused on supporting emerging managers in the impact investment space. Oftentimes, emerging fund managers in the space are not getting kind of the capital that they require from LPs. Because there's misunderstanding. Oh, I'm investing as an LP in an impact investment fund, my return is going to be lower. No, like as Venture Soup, for example, for Conscious Collective, we're not aiming for lower returns. We're aiming for VC market rate returns. So I think capital would be I think important. And you know, once we have capital, then we'll see more emerging fund managers popping up, specifically focused on investing in things that matter, to be perfectly frank, you know, in kind of long-term ventures that are going to have a positive impact on our environment and our society.
As an investor, what's your outlook or view on leading economies in Asia post-COVID? Which countries do you think offer the best opportunities for investment?
So if we look at Southeast Asia specifically, the ones that come to mind are Indonesia. So we made one investment already in Indonesia in the last 6 months. Vietnam is one that we're keeping an eye out on. We haven't invested there so far, but it is one that we think is an interesting prospect from an investment standpoint. And the Philippines also. I think if you look, kind of go a bit west and kind of South Asia, of course, India is a huge market and it's a bit of a crowded market from an investment standpoint and a startup standpoint as well. But I think, you know, Pakistan and Bangladesh are very interesting markets. What's interesting is that we're seeing a lot of regional funds here incorporating Pakistan now as part of their mandates. So we're seeing a lot of crossover. We ourselves have invested in a couple of companies in Pakistan. We're seeing some of our other colleagues from other funds here also investing in Pakistan. I think the beauty of sitting where we are right now is we're kind of at the intersection of this new digital Silk Route, right? You have pockets of Africa, you have MENA, you have South Asia, you have Southeast Asia. And we kind of sit at the nexus of all these really kind of exciting new markets. When you think about it, over half the population by 2050 is going to be sitting in those markets, right? They're going to be strewn across MENA and Africa and South Asia and Southeast Asia. So for me, that's really where the most exciting opportunities will lie. But then when you think about it as well, what is the common thread amongst these markets that cover this new digital Silk Route, if you will, is threefold, right? The common thread amongst all these markets is financial exclusion, food insecurity, and climate vulnerability. And that's why those are kind of the three areas that we're going to be focusing on, because that's where the opportunities are going to lie. And those are where the challenges are going to come from as well.
You mentioned financial inclusion. How do you want to see governments or startups supporting financial inclusion across the region?
I think it's already happening. If you're dealing with markets such as emerging markets, any fintech opportunity is a financial inclusion opportunity, right? So if you look at this company we invested into in Indonesia, they basically created a bookkeeping app for SMEs, similar to KataBook, for example, in India, but for Indonesia, right? That's a relevant proposition, fintech proposition, across any market that I just mentioned earlier, right? So I think that's kind of where we're going to see the trend going, especially if you're focused on emerging markets. And then the other thing is also, how do we bring some of the technologies coming out of the West into our region as well? And so, of course, fintech is huge, and COVID has definitely accelerated the sector here in MENA. We have a dedicated separate fund just for that. And so it's in a really exciting time to be sitting in MENA right now as an investor who has fintech as one of their areas of focus.
And you did mention success earlier on in our conversation. What do you consider to be your biggest success to date in terms of VentureSouk's investments?
So, not to date myself, however, I encourage everyone to have pockets of self-introspection on your respective journeys, which is kind of what I went through in 2018 when I started really thinking about, what do I want my legacy to be as Sonia, right? Forget VentureSouk. I don't define myself by my company, but what do I want to leave once I leave this realm that I'm in right now? And what I decided is that I wanted alignment. I wanted alignment between my personal kind of aspirations and my professional aspirations. And that was the genesis for building Conscious Collective, is how do we empower people to give their money more purpose and more impact? And how do we build this next generation of companies that are really looking to solve our collective most pressing challenges? And so yeah, I guess I don't know if that answers your question, but I think kind of that sense of alignment, I think, is something that I'm proud of. I really feel purposefully aligned, as cheesy as that may sound to some who are listening in, but I think it's so important to have that alignment between your personal life and your professional life. And I really get my energy from the entrepreneurs that I speak with based on what they're building. That's kind of what motivates me the most. And so my proudest accomplishment would be building out kind of this conscious investment movement out of this region, hopefully.
Well, I'm sure, and I think you're already there. But in terms of your lessons, you've obviously, through VentureSouk, invested in over 200 companies and have spoken to and engaged with many, many more. What are the key lessons you've taken from that, either for yourself or for any entrepreneurs listening today?
So it actually ties in with my last point, which is around self-introspection. When we look at the companies that have not done so well from our portfolio, oftentimes it's not a question of the entrepreneur not having the right pedigree or the right experience, or it's not even that the idea is a bad one, but oftentimes it's just not the right time for that entrepreneur to start a business. And so hence why I keep on talking about alignment. I think if you're an entrepreneur in the audience listening in, I know you're busy fundraising. I know you're busy, obviously, managing your own business, but don't forget to also take time to just sit with yourself and think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. I think it's really an important exercise for anyone to do, whether you be an entrepreneur or an investor or a corporate or anyone really, is just kind of understanding yourself better will make you a better leader, for example, if you're a founder, right? And if you're a better leader, then that'll make the success of your company a lot more easy on you as a founder, and surrounding yourself with the right people who are motivated by you as a conscious leader as well.
Thank you. We've obviously, Sonia, had an unprecedented year and a bit, creating unexpected challenges for entrepreneurs and startups. And startups are renowned for being agile and being able to change, but equally that often means it comes without necessarily a cash reserve or a serious customer base to fall back on in difficult times. So what do you see as the strengths and challenges for businesses over the next few years?
So, I mean, I think So what we did when the pandemic hit last year was we actually did AMAs, so Ask Me Anything sessions. And we did it by pockets. So we actually, instead of doing it one-on-one with our portfolio companies, we actually brought our portfolio companies together because a lot of them were actually facing similar challenges. And this was kind of an experiment for us. But in hindsight, it was such a beautiful experiment because what ended up happening organically is initially, of course, everyone was talking to us and asking us for advice in front of the other entrepreneurs. But then you saw entrepreneurs kind of jumping in and being like, oh, so-and-so, we encountered this issue. This is how we dealt with it. Happy to talk about it. And so I think, yes, agility is, of course, key, especially amidst these unprecedented times. I think what's interesting as an investor is oftentimes the question that entrepreneurs get the most is, how scalable is your business, right? What we had to ask ourselves as investors was, how easy is it for this business to scale down? Which is never something we'd ever asked ourselves before, and probably not what the entrepreneurs had asked themselves either. And so I think this was a bit of a reset and a wake-up call for everyone, investors and entrepreneurs alike, in terms of how agile you are as a team, how agile you are from a business model standpoint, et cetera, and how much runway you have from a capital injection standpoint. So those companies that were about to fundraise are probably the ones that struggled the most. The ones who had 12 or 18 months runway under their belts probably actually did better because they were able to shave costs either on the human capital front or on the marketing front, et cetera. So I guess my advice to entrepreneurs, hopefully this will never again happen in our lifetime, but it is a learning, and we're still in the midst of it. COVID is definitely not over, but is to kind of learn from other entrepreneurs. I think that's one key. Like, I think if there's a lesson to be taken from this, is a lot of investors and entrepreneurs talking a lot more and interacting a lot more. And so I encourage entrepreneurs to talk to some of their peers and learn from their experiences as well. I think there's opportunity for cross-pollination across different types of startups as well. So you may be encountering different problems, but you may be able to support each other as well. So those are some of the learnings.
Well, Sonia, I'm sure that just like me, the others in the audience would love to hear more of your insights. You've shared so much with us. Thank you for your generosity, and really, really interesting session there. Everybody listening, if you've got thoughts, questions, comments, please do post them on the social media wall with the hashtag ABLFcity. And remember that if you missed a part of this brilliant session or any of the others from today or previous ABLF conclaves, you can always come back here right now after this session to look at previous events on demand anytime after today. So thank you so much, Sonia, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. Remember that we are back every month featuring global leaders in powerful conversations.